low-serving, what they call private schools, and if they go to these schools, they're never going to be able to get into college. It's bar none. You know, you set a glass ceiling to these students. So no matter what, they're going to end up in the factory. I mean, even if they do go to college, they're probably going to end up in the factory as well. A lot of the high-tech factories that I went into, you could only get into those factories with a technical or college degree. I went into Foxconn, which is one of the world's largest high-tech companies, and they have the main contracts for all the Apple iPods, iPhones, gaming systems in the world. They make all the different laptops. I mean, you're talking massive, massive factories.
300,000 workers.
The one I went to was 300,000. The largest that they have are two in Shanghai, which have over 500,000.
This size of Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah, half of Vermont.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just very, and just to give you an idea of like cost of tuition and how much these people are making, the average floor worker in Foxconn will, with a college degree or a technical school degree, makes about $125 US a month.
So they can't send their kid to the school.
Well, there's no way their kids are going to school. Which is about, I think it was 1,000 RMB a month.
Which is considered a standard of practice.
Yeah, which you went to school for this. This job.
Plus it also creates a class system.
Oh, huge.
Which is actually maybe helpful, going back to your original question. Because if you have a really heavy-duty class system, people get really angry.
Well, you mean helpful in the sense that if workers begin to identify with one another.
Yeah, it's a class,
Yeah.
but it becomes so stratified.
In fact, probably aware of this, that the United States and China are the number 2 and 3 most stratified economies now in the world, and the first is
Brazil is
Brazil.
worse. There's some
Brazil.
African countries that are worse,
Ironic.
but among
Yeah.
the Gini, yeah.
I think
Some-
China's around 48 at this point.
Tao is like, I mean, they're worried about the growing gap.
Yes.
By the
It's
time,
a
just
big
a few
topic
years
of
ago, in
discussion.
Beijing, they were like admitting
Yeah.
millionaires to the party.
Something
And yeah, I'd like to say the managers are running the trade unions, but the party realizes that if the class struggle takes place within the party will shatter.
Oh yeah.
So they're worried about that, and they're trying to begin to address some of these problems. But.
Something.
So Ellen, I'm sorry, Ellen.
Go ahead, go.
I was really fascinated what you're saying about there being virtually no independent union organization. Incredible
Not
level
only
of repression.
virtually,
You have
but not.
tremendous upheaval, right? You read about it, you see in the Times all the time, 1-2 day strikes, but it doesn't lead to any permanent organization, which is mind-boggling. And I wonder how much of that is repression, with leaders trying to do that, but being put in jail and not happening. And then the other question that is just fascinating is the leadership in is it the UFCTU? I'm sure there's a lot of different layers, but the gentleman that you befriended sounds very interesting. I'm sure different than a lot of other leaders. I'm sure there's a lot of internal struggle, but it sounds like there's loyalty to their party, which is to the massive, rapid economic development, and some have some loyalty to representing some workers' interests. Can you talk about that?
Yes, this question about why there is, how you can both have this much exploitation and action on the part of workers, and why is it not leading to independent, the notion of an independent organization is something like scholars and researchers are beginning to look into now, and there's a variety of answers. I mean, one is that most of the workers who are in motion are teenage girls, teenage boys, very young, peasants, often, so with very little, not only no experience themselves of the socialist era or any of the meaning of that, but very often their parents and teachers don't want to talk about the period that they consider to have been an incredibly painful period of time in the consciousness of the people, which was the Cultural Revolution. And so oblivion, historical oblivion imposed on this generation. So I think the idea of self-organization and organization on behalf of workers' interests, not there. The second, I think, is their own extremely conditional and transitory relationship to the work. They don't see themselves as factory workers who are going to be working in these factories for any time longer than the absolute minimum necessary to earn money to send home to help support their parents. It's not really where they want to be. I think the third is, it is hard to describe the way in which the presence and the force of the government is taken as an absolutely incontrovertible fact like breathing air. Now, Stuart and I have been there for 5 months last year, 5 months this year, teaching very, very bright undergraduate and graduate students at one of the most elite universities in China, Sun University. Very smart, pass national examinations. We will talk with them at great length about the social problems that they face. They'll understand, they will analyze, they will do research. And the final punchline of every conversation, which is the same, which is, well, what needs to be done about this social problem is always the government will take care of it. The government must take care of it. And even if we say, so what is the possibility of you as a graduate student here at Zhongshan University, going off tremendous privilege, the education, you've had all this exposure and getting a job in the government and influencing the government. Almost beyond anyone's comprehension.
And these are all students, probably 95% of them who are candidate members of the Communist Party. So they are part of this very small elite in terms of education and access to sort of party levers, and they don't see themselves
Even
as
they.
that.
So the lack of instrumentality or efficacy is very, very strong. Fourth is independent, the idea of independent activity outside of or apart from the party doesn't exist in terms of civil society at all. It only exists in an entrepreneurial framework. So the only way people can think of any independent activity is maybe I'll start a business.
But how did, you have a culture of people who lived during Mao where that kind of individualism was, wiped out essentially, or as much as it could be. And then comes along enterprise and business. How did it intrude into the society so successfully at this point? And why can't you then intrude into society around workers? Because I actually think corporate world are brilliant in how they intrude and how they kind of influence the way in which we think and believe in our ideas. And if you kind of took the knowledge, some of it's obnoxious, but if you took that kind of knowledge of how they intrude into the society to all of a sudden, it's okay to own, or it's okay to be a manager, or it's okay to whatever the layers are.
Well, it has to be said. Madden doesn't get such great reviews. There were
60% right, 40% wrong.
He's now down to 60-40. Okay.
They calibrated.
He's been sinking.
That's way better than Bush.
Better than Bush.
From the 30 million or so who died during the Great Leap Forward to the ravages, the social and psychological and economic ravages of the Cultural Revolution, things are a lot better for people now.
Right.
That is another sort of reality, and so they don't see kind of going back to that. That kind of communal spirit there's nothing there really that inspires people. There are some exceptions.
Except for Landry.
Oh, yeah, landlords. And they actually did, like many people, preferred a more equitable society. And there was a lot of discussion about that. People will talk about that. But they miss the
I had an
effort.
essay from a student that really kind of capsulized for me sort of the progress. She described her grandfather as being an orthodox communist, and he was an engineer and worked during the Mao, a very traditional communist, and really believed in it. Parents were intellectuals, were involved with Tiananmen in 1989, and now sort of are kind of lying low, and they have had that experience, that sort of little glimmer of this opening that got sort of pretty brutally suppressed. She is now a 24-year-old, very bright, sort of graduate student, had been a chemistry undergraduate, which is sort of a very select kind of thing. It's a ticket to making lots of money. She decided to go to graduate school and become a social worker, which is sort of unheard of. And she confided to me that I couldn't tell anybody, but I think her secret is safe here, is that she'd become a Christian. And that was her way of sort of finding something outside of herself. She doesn't turn to communism or Marx or Lenin's, but turns to this sort of ideal of kind of a primitive Christianity. It's not really a religion for her, it's more like a kind of an ideology, a way of life. So that's some of what goes on, I think.
I just would say one thing to put it in a very long historical perspective, but if you go all the way back to like the 11th century, okay, some things, put it in a long perspective.
So this is gonna be only 5 minutes?
Yeah, that's actually, no, I can do it in a minute.
Okay.
There's always been this interplay between two ways to get ahead in China.
Okay.
And one was to join the bureaucracy. The Chinese invented bureaucracy in 250 BC, okay? It was a meritocracy, and it was the one way to get ahead was to study, pass the exams, and go into government. And if you couldn't do that, the other way to get ahead was to go into business, which was why the Chinese folk religion is completely, Frank used to call it the Chinese money religion. You know, burn paper money, and build up credit in heaven.
Mao was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
good.
Huh?
Yeah,
Mao was an
so there,
unnatural good.
well, one way to look at it, and I mean, it is a little more, I mean, because there are aspects of the Mao period that people are invested in, like land rights, but the idea that, you know, entrepreneurship just suddenly was invented, you've got to look at it as from 1949 to 1979, there was only 30 years,
As
at
opposed to
at
2000.
most, where you couldn't practice private enterprise, and actually up through the 1950s, until around 55 you could, and then by 78, 79 you could, so 30 years isn't a long time to lose hundreds of years of entrepreneurial culture. So it's not new in China at all. You know, it's not, it's
Yeah.
very different from the Soviet Union where it's 70 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing, I mean, the lesson the Chinese people have learned over the millennia is that, you know, the state is all powerful. The state goes through turbulence in which suddenly a dynasty falls and that there's mass executions of court or whatever. So for the common people, the way to survive is blend into the mass. Don't stick up, you know, just, you know, keep your head down, be one little fish in the school of fish. And so, you know, people will do that until finally all the contradictions of society build up. And then there's a massive explosion like the Taiping Rebellion or something like that, which was based on like ideas of Christian egalitarianism. So, I mean, China has always been, you know, very calm for long periods, and then suddenly there's massive social explosions. Because, I mean, that's just the way it is. People will endure and endure and endure, and finally they can't take it anymore, and then things happen.
Well, any other questions, any comments, any thoughts? Anybody want to come to China? Well, I will say I do have, oh, May's, I can see she's thinking about it. I have,
You planted that seed a while ago.
yes, I have. Well, I will say this and, you know, be out there and open to it. There are some opportunities now, and it kind of answer a little bit more answer to your question, Philip. I don't believe that anybody in China really sees the real possibility of development of an independent union. But I think that there is a very serious possibility that there can be some very perhaps cataclysmic internal debate within the ACFTA.
Will he come here to Burlington?
I don't think I'll be able to
No.
get him this close.
No,
But I will,
yeah.
he will go to Cambridge, yeah, I'll get him to Boston.
Well,
So that's great. I think I'll speak at Harvard, yeah. But, so, I wouldn't say that anybody's goal, so it would be my goal, so it would be to see a split, but to see in the way have seen in trade union movements here in Europe and in Canada and in Latin America, where there are forces favoring democratic self-empowerment of workers versus, a bureaucratic top-down model, and there are struggles, internal struggles that develop. I think that's possible. And I think it's very significant because there's really nowhere in the world except in Latin America, perhaps to some degree, and in a place like Korea, which has been subject just recently to very, very brutal government suppression, Korean trade union movement. So there are not very many places where we have either a model or an inspiration or the material base or the experience to guide a new wave of workers' movements. And the dominance of elites, the establishment of neoliberalism against the world order, as we know, is very dangerous. Dangerous to the environment, dangerous to health, to our standard of living everywhere. So I think a powerful and capable trade union movement developing in any major country is going to be very significant for inspiring movements elsewhere. So I am on a crusade to bring as many capable people as I can to come spend some time, and I'm working with a Labor Notes crowd now, and I've gotten people to come and spend a couple weeks or a month, or James Slaughter, who someone who knows, the founder of Labor Notes, came and taught at Zhongshan this past semester when we were there, and another very capable, respected labor author and historian, Dan Labatz. I just negotiated a stay for him at Zhongshan, talking about U.S. and Latin American labor history. I'm trying to get James and Rebecca to agree to come. Anyway, please do think about this for yourself and other people that you know. I cannot tell you, one other just personal note, it is so fantastic to be there in terms of the receptivity, the interest, the sincerity, the arduousness, the earnest engagement of both students and workers and colleagues that I get to work with, who are seeing the world open up a little bit in some different ways. It's incredibly satisfying and meaningful, and I think we have observed that people take the experience of being exposed to the outside world and some outside ideas very seriously, and start making changes in their own lives.
And we need to redress the balance. One of the scary things when you come back here and you listen to politicians talk about China, including, unfortunately, your boss much of the time. They have it so wrong. They have it so wrong in so many different ways. That there are different ways of being wrong. And the Chinese are so much better informed about us than we are about them. I mean, in very nuanced ways. I remember picking up a book that they used to teach English, and it was a very nuanced conversation about racism in the United States. And it wasn't polemical, it wasn't finger pointing. So this is a difficult problem, they're struggling, they're trying to figure out a way to do it. Very balanced. We know so little about them, and so the more of us that can get over there and learn some more and kind of spread the word.
I'll give you one example of that. We were watching the news one night, and I think it's the guy who's now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He's a Navy guy or something, an admiral. He was, about a year ago, he came over and he chastised the Chinese government because they had increased their defense budget by 17% in 1 year. Now that's a substantial increase, percentage-wise, but it brought it up to a whopping $45 billion, which is what, about 7% of ours? And he was talking about how this was destabilizing Asia. Now, our family, and the head of the household is a real news junkie.
Yeah.
They knew this was crap. They knew exactly what we spend. These are peasants.
Yeah, no, right, they don't have
I don't even think they went to high school. They know what we spend roughly per year on the military. And they're saying, how can he say that? And we're saying, of course it's crap.
Yeah.
They know so much more about us. And we have colleagues in academia who don't know what China's spending.
Are you safe over there? Anybody come? Are you
That's
safe?
right. Are you safe? Can you eat the food?
I have a very interesting story along those lines. This young woman who was a translator for me, I was at a women's rights litigation center in Beijing talking, she translated for the whole day. And then we went off and she was a translator in a big city. And she was about to go to law school, very bright young woman. And at one point she turns to me and she says, Pete, there's something about law enforcement in the United States they just don't understand. How come people obey the law even if they know they won't get caught if they don't? That is a very telling comment. It was sophisticated on her side. She was somebody who was reading law and reading cases. But it was a very interesting comment on what's happened to the sense of the common good in that society.
It's the level of ignorance among educated people in this country is mind-boggling. You just have to live overseas long enough to really appreciate that.
One other thing I'll say, last year we were half the year in Germany and then half in China. And the one thing that was kind of sad to me, but I'm very happy to hear you talk about the European-Canadian trade union links. And it's kind of so exciting to hear anything, even little, about workers working together instead of, like you say, China bashing or, our workers against your workers, but let's find ways we can work together. But it was always a little sad to us that Europe seems in people's mental map to be so much smaller than, America in China. And it's sad to see America as a kind of alter ego for many reasons.
We keep telling them, follow the European model, not the American.
We kept talking
Public
more about Europe.
transportation, good social programs, unions, and much,
Currency.
Yes,
it
right.
has a real money.
Paternity
It's sort of like
leave,
rooting for the Chicago Cubs
daycare.
there, you know?
Yeah, America has this real alter ego, which is a shame, and we kept trying to sort of like, no.
But actually, in labor relations,
That's
the
nice to
labor
hear,
law
yeah.
reform most closely resembles German labor law.
Good.
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 That's
More
good.
than the
Very
US.
good.
I
That's
don't
a
know
step forward,
enough
yeah.
about
That's
German labor
good.
model, although I'm learning more about it, but it is more of this kind of works council notion.
Germany had universal health care in 1883.
Yeah.
What was it? 1883?
Not 1983,
Yeah.
18, and he makes Bush look like a Bolshevik. I mean,
Oh,
1883.
God. Ah, bless this country.
That strong socialist and communist party.
Of course, yeah.